Black woman fired from her bank, shortly reveals her CEO status in shocking twist. You can't do this. I've been with this bank for over 30 years. Eleanor Jackson stood her ground, chin raised, as the young man in the expensive suit continued to berate her in front of the entire bank lobby. Customers had stopped mid-transaction, tellers froze at their stations, and security guards shifted uncomfortably near the entrance. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I don't care if you've been here since they built this place, the man sneered, his voice rising with each word. The fact is, you've violated bank policy, and as regional director, I have every right to terminate your employment effective immediately. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. You're making a terrible mistake. The only mistake was letting someone like you have access to our premium accounts in the first place, he shot back, the implication of his words hanging heavily in the air. Security will escort you out. Don't bother collecting your things, they'll be mailed to you. The security guard, a man named Reggie who had known Eleanor for years, approached reluctantly. His eyes conveyed a silent apology. Wait, came a voice from across the lobby. Heads turned to see Catherine Winters, the bank's head of HR, rushing toward them with a look of alarm. Marshall, what are you doing? Marshall Donnelly straightened his tie. Handling a situation that should have been addressed long ago. This woman has been giving unauthorized exceptions to certain customers. The way he emphasized the word made it clear what he meant. It stops today. Catherine's face paled. Marshall, you need to stop this right now. You don't understand? I understand perfectly, Marshall interrupted. And frankly, I'm disappointed that the rest of management has allowed this kind of behavior to continue. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, a strange calm settling over her features. Slowly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather portfolio. Mr. Donnelly, she said quietly, I believe you started with First Capital 3 months ago, is that correct? Marshall frowned. That's irrelevant. Eleanor opened the portfolio and removed a business card, placing it on the counter between them. I think you'll find it's quite relevant. Marshall glanced down, confusion giving way to shock as he read the embossed card. Eleanor Jackson, Chief Executive Officer, First Capital Bank. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Eleanor Jackson began what she thought would be a routine day at First Capital Bank. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Eleanor Jackson's modest 2-story home in Oak Park, the same house she had purchased with her late husband William back in 1982. At 68, Eleanor maintained the same disciplined routine she had followed for decades. Up at 5:30 a.m., 30 minutes on her stationary bike while watching the morning news, shower, breakfast, and out the door by 7:15. Eleanor carefully selected a pearl gray pantsuit from her closet, conservative but elegant, with a silk scarf in the bank's signature blue and gold colors. As she fastened her grandmother's pearl earrings, she glanced at the photograph on her dresser. William in his army uniform, taken just before he shipped out to Vietnam in 1971. He had returned changed, like so many others, but they had built a good life together until cancer took him 5 years ago. Another day, another dollar, right, William? Eleanor spoke to the photograph, a habit she had never broken. She grabbed her purse and headed downstairs. In the kitchen, Eleanor poured coffee into her travel mug, the one her granddaughter Zoe had given her for Christmas, emblazoned with World's Best Grandma CEO. The title still made her smile. When she had started as a teller at First Capital Bank in 1979, she never imagined she would one day lead the institution. Back then, just having a job where she could wear a nice dress and help people with their finances seemed like success enough for a young black woman from the south side of Chicago. Eleanor's phone rang as she was heading out the door. The screen showed Catherine Winters, her head of human resources and one of her most trusted colleagues. Good morning, Catherine, Eleanor answered, locking her front door. Morning, Eleanor. Just wanted to remind you about today's board presentation. The quarterly numbers look strong, but I'm anticipating some pushback on the community lending initiative. Eleanor slid into her car, a sensible Buick she'd owned for nearly a decade. Let them push back. Those loans have lower default rates than our premium portfolios, and you know it. I've got the data to prove it. Always prepared, Catherine chuckled. Oh, and Marshall Donnelly has been asking questions about your branch visit today. Seems very interested in why the CEO is doing a surprise inspection at his location. Eleanor sighed. Marshall Donnelly was First Capital's newest regional director, a 40-something MBA from New York who had been brought in by the board 3 months ago. Young, ambitious, and with the subtle arrogance of someone who believed his credentials spoke for themselves. It's not an inspection, and it's not a surprise. It's the same visit I make to every branch once a quarter, Eleanor explained, pulling onto the street. I like to keep my finger on the pulse of our customer service, you know that. I know, but Marshall seems to think it's some kind of test. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Thanks, Catherine, I'll handle Marshall, always do. After ending the call, Eleanor turned on the radio. The familiar voice of Casey Kasem introduced a countdown of classic hits, and soon Aretha Franklin was demanding respect through the speakers. Eleanor hummed along, tapping the steering wheel as she navigated the morning traffic. Instead of heading directly to the downtown headquarters where she typically worked, Eleanor drove to the Oak Grove branch, one of First Capital's oldest locations, and the branch where she had started as a teller all those years ago. Her quarterly visits were something of a tradition now, a way to stay connected to the front lines of the business and to remember where she had come from. As she pulled into the parking lot, Eleanor noticed a sleek black BMW in the spot marked Regional Director. Marshall was already here. She sighed. This wasn't part of her plan for the day. Eleanor gathered her things, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Today, she wouldn't announce herself as the CEO right away. She would observe, interact as a customer first, then reveal her position later. It was something she did occasionally to get an unfiltered view of operations. Some board members criticized the practice as undercover boss theatrics, but Eleanor found it invaluable. She removed her CEO badge and tucked it into her purse, along with her business cards. For the next hour or so, she would just be Eleanor Jackson, customer. The bank had just opened for the day, and only a few customers were inside. Eleanor recognized several of the tellers. Most had been with the bank for years. There was Denise, who had started just 5 years after Eleanor herself, Michael, who had joined after returning from Desert Storm, and a few newer faces Eleanor had met during previous visits. What she didn't immediately see was anyone who matched Marshall Donnelly's description. Eleanor joined the short line for the tellers, standing behind an elderly woman who was clutching a deposit slip and a small pouch that likely contained collection envelopes from her church. Eleanor had seen many such transactions during her years as a teller. "Good morning, welcome to First Capital," said the young woman at the counter when it was Eleanor's turn. Her nameplate read Jessica. She was new. Eleanor didn't recognize her from previous visits. "Good morning, Jessica," Eleanor smiled warmly. "I'd like to inquire about refinancing options for my mortgage, please." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. "I'd be happy to help you with that. Do you have an account with us?" "Yes, I do. I've been banking here for quite some time." "Great. May I see your account information and ID?" Eleanor reached into her purse and produced her driver's license and bank card. Jessica examined them and typed something into her computer. "Ms. Jackson, I see you have a standard checking account with us. For mortgage refinancing, you'll want to speak with one of our loan specialists. Let me see if Mr. Roberts is available." As Jessica picked up the phone, Eleanor noticed a commotion near the bank manager's office. The door opened, and out walked a tall man in an expensive suit, Marshall Donnelly, she presumed followed by Diane Foster, the branch manager. Diane looked flustered, her usually composed demeanor clearly rattled. "I don't care what your process has been in the past," Marshall was saying, his voice carrying across the lobby. "From now on, we follow corporate policy to the letter. No exceptions, no special treatment." Diane nodded, though Eleanor could see the resistance in her posture. "Of course, Mr. Donnelly, I understand." Eleanor watched the interaction with interest. This was precisely why she valued these undercover visits. They revealed the true dynamics at play within her organization. Jessica hung up the phone. "Mr. Roberts can see you in about 15 minutes. Would you like to wait, or would you prefer to make an appointment for another day?" "I'll wait, thank you," Eleanor replied, taking a seat in the waiting area. From this vantage point, she could observe the entire lobby while appearing to be engrossed in a bank brochure about retirement accounts. Marshall Donnelly was now speaking with one of the loan officers, gesturing emphatically. The loan officer, Paul Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the bank, was nodding politely, but Eleanor recognized the set of his jaw. Paul was not happy. After a few minutes, Eleanor noticed something concerning. An older black man entered the bank and approached Denise's window. Mr. Washington. Eleanor remembered him from her teller days. He had been a small business owner in the community for decades, running a barbershop that had become something of a neighborhood institution. Mr. Washington seemed distressed, speaking in hushed tones to Denise. Denise looked uncomfortable, glancing repeatedly toward Marshall Donnelly, who was now standing near the teller stations, observing the transactions with a critical eye. Eventually, Denise called over Diane, who spoke briefly with Mr. Washington before leading him to her office. As they passed, Eleanor caught fragments of their conversation. Just need a little more time, that's all, Mr. Washington was saying. Never missed a payment before last month. I understand, Mr. Washington, but the new policies are very strict about. The rest was lost as they entered the office and closed the door. Marshall Donnelly watched them go, his expression unreadable. A few minutes later, Mr. Washington emerged from the office looking defeated. He nodded politely to Diane and left the bank without speaking to anyone else. Diane remained in her doorway, watching him go with a troubled expression. Marshall approached Diane immediately. What was that about? Mr. Washington needed an extension on his business loan payment, Diane explained quietly. His wife has been ill and the medical bills have— Did you grant the extension? Marshall interrupted. Diane hesitated. I explained that under the new policies I would need approval from— Good, Marshall cut her off again. Send the request through proper channels. No more of these handshake agreements that have been happening around here. Just then Jessica approached Eleanor. Ms. Jackson, Mr. Roberts can see you now. Eleanor thanked her and followed her to a small office where a middle-aged man in a button-down shirt and tie greeted her with a firm handshake. Good morning, Ms. Jackson. I'm Thomas Roberts. I understand you're interested in refinancing options. Yes, that's right, Eleanor replied, taking the offered seat. I've had my mortgage with First Capital for nearly 20 years now. A loyal customer. We appreciate that, Roberts smiled, typing on his keyboard. Let me pull up your information. So what's prompting you to consider refinancing now? While Roberts searched for her information, Eleanor noticed his expression change subtly as he looked at her account details. Ms. Jackson, it seems there's a flag on your account. Would you excuse me for just a moment? Before Eleanor could respond, Roberts had left the office. Through the glass partition, she could see him approach Marshall Donnelly, showing him something on a tablet. Donnelly frowned, looked toward the office where Eleanor sat, and then nodded curtly. Roberts returned, his demeanor noticeably cooler. I apologize, Ms. Jackson, but it seems you don't qualify for our refinancing programs at this time. Your income-to-debt ratio doesn't meet our current requirements. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. That's interesting, Mr. Roberts, considering my mortgage is nearly paid off, and I have no other debt. Roberts shifted uncomfortably. Yes, well, there are other factors we consider. Perhaps you'd like to try again in 6 months when your financial situation might have improved. The implication was clear, and Eleanor had seen it before, the assumption that an older black woman couldn't possibly be financially secure enough to qualify for certain banking services. It was more subtle than the discrimination she had faced in the 1970s and 80s, but it was discrimination nonetheless. I see, Eleanor said calmly. And who made this determination? I'd like to speak with them directly. Roberts glanced nervously toward Marshall Donnelly, who was now watching their interaction from across the lobby. I'm afraid all loan decisions are final at the branch level. You're welcome to submit a formal application that would be reviewed by our loan committee, but I should warn you that the process takes several weeks. Eleanor stood, straightening her jacket. Thank you for your time, Mr. Roberts. I'll be sure to follow up on this matter. As Eleanor left the office, she saw Diane Foster intercepting an elderly white couple who had just entered the bank. Unlike the interaction with Mr. Washington, Diane was all smiles, ushering them directly into her office without any apparent concern for proper channels. Eleanor decided it was time to observe Marshall Donnelly more directly. She approached the information desk where he now stood reviewing some paperwork. Excuse me, Eleanor began. I've just been told that I don't qualify for refinancing, and I'd like to understand why. Marshall barely looked up from his papers. Our loan officers make determinations based on established criteria, ma'am. If you were declined, I'm sure there was a valid reason. I've been banking with First Capital for over 40 years, Eleanor continued. I'd appreciate a more thorough explanation. Now Marshall did look up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and condescension. 40 years or 4 days, the criteria are the same for everyone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important matters to attend to. As he turned to walk away, Eleanor made a decision. This had gone far enough. Mr. Donnelly, she called after him, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had served her well in countless board meetings. I believe we should continue this conversation in private. Something in her tone made him pause. He turned back, irritation evident on his face. And you are? Eleanor Jackson. Yes, I know your name, Ms. Jackson. What I don't know is why you think your refinancing application warrants special attention from the regional director. It's not about the refinancing, Eleanor replied calmly. It's about the pattern of behavior I've observed in this branch today. Marshall's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I've witnessed different standards being applied to different customers. loan decisions being made based on appearances rather than financial qualifications, and a general atmosphere of intimidation toward your staff. By now, several employees and customers were watching the exchange. Diane Foster had emerged from her office, concern etched on her face. Marshall's expression darkened. "I don't know who you think you are, but you can't come into my branch and make accusations like that." "Your branch?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Yes, MY branch. I'm the regional director, and I'm responsible for ensuring that all branches in my region operate according to corporate policy." "And who defines that policy, Mr. Donnelly?" Marshall scoffed. "The executive team, of course, and I can assure you they would not approve of customers questioning how we run our business." "Is that so?" Eleanor's voice remained calm, but there was a steely edge to it now. "What if the customer in question is also an employee?" Marshall's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "An employee? Are you saying you work for First Capital?" "I do indeed." Now Marshall looked truly perplexed, glancing around as if seeking confirmation from the other staff members. Diane Foster had moved closer, clearly alarmed by the confrontation. "I don't recognize you," Marshall said finally. "What department are you with?" "Executive leadership," Eleanor replied simply. Marshall laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Right. And I'm the Federal Reserve Chairman. Look, if you're a teller at another branch or something, that doesn't give you the right to interfere with operations here." It was at this point that Eleanor should have revealed her identity as CEO. In hindsight, that would have been the professional thing to do. But decades of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed had created a deep well of patience in Eleanor, along with a subtle appreciation for moments of revelation. "Mr. Donnelly, I'd like to discuss the situation with Mr. Washington, the gentleman who was seeking an extension on his business loan." Marshall's face hardened. "That's confidential bank business and absolutely none of your concern, regardless of where you might work within the organization." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, "the fair treatment of all our customers is very much my concern. First Capital was founded on principles of community investment and equitable service." "Times change," Marshall said dismissively. "Banking is a business, not a charity. Our primary responsibility is to our shareholders." "And to our community," Eleanor countered. "Without the trust of the communities we serve, we have nothing." Marshall checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. "This conversation is over. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing to customer service." He turned to Diane Foster. "Ms. Foster, please escort this woman out of the branch." Diane looked horrified. "Mr. Donnelly, I don't think that wasn't a suggestion," Marshall snapped. Eleanor held up a hand. "It's all right, Diane, I'll go, but Mr. Donnelly, this matter isn't concluded." As Eleanor turned to leave, Marshall called after her. "Actually, wait a moment. You said you work for this bank?" Eleanor turned back. "Yes, I did." "In what capacity exactly? Because impersonating a bank employee is a serious offense." "I'm not impersonating anyone," Eleanor replied calmly. Marshall stepped closer, lowering his voice to a threatening tone. "Show me your employee ID right now or I'm calling security." Eleanor reached into her purse, but instead of producing her CEO badge, she removed a pen and notepad. "I'd like to make sure I have your full name correctly for my report." "Report?" Marshall laughed incredulously. "What report?" "The one I'll be filing regarding the troubling practices I've observed today." Marshall's face flushed with anger. "That's it. You're clearly trying to cause trouble here." He raised his voice, addressing the entire lobby. "This woman is claiming to be a bank employee but refuses to provide identification. She's disrupting business and making false accusations." He turned to the security guard near the entrance. "Reggie, please escort this woman from the premises." Reggie, a man in his 50s who had worked security at the branch for years, approached reluctantly. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Eleanor stood her ground. "Reggie, you know who I am." The security guard's eyes widened in recognition, and he immediately stepped back. "Yes, ma'am, I do." Marshall looked between them, confusion giving way to suspicion. "What's going on here, Reggie? Do your job." Reggie shook his head. "Sir, I think you should—" "This is insubordination," Marshall exploded. "First this woman, now you. Does anyone here understand chain of command?" Diane Foster stepped forward. "Mr. Donnelly, please, if you would just listen." "I've heard enough," Marshall cut her off. "Ms. Jackson, if that's even your real name, you've been causing disruption in this branch and interfering with bank operations. If you are indeed an employee, then you've violated multiple policies today." Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "And which policies would those be?" "Impersonating a higher-level employee, refusing to identify yourself, questioning management decisions, interfering with customer transactions. Take your pick." Marshall was nearly shouting now. "If you do work for this bank, consider yourself suspended pending an investigation. If you don't, then you're trespassing and will involve the police." The bank lobby had gone completely silent. Customers stood frozen in place, employees watched with expressions ranging from shock to horror, and Diane Foster looked as though she might be ill. Eleanor took a deep breath. This had escalated far beyond what she had intended, but there was no turning back now. "You can't do this. I've been with this bank for over 30 years," Eleanor said, her voice rising with genuine emotion. This was no longer just about observing branch operations. It had become personal. Marshall sneered, "I don't care if you've been here since they built this place. The fact is, you've violated bank policy, and as regional director, I have every right to terminate your employment effective immediately." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "You're making a terrible mistake. The only mistake was letting someone like you have access to our premium accounts in the first place," he shot back, the implication of his words hanging heavily in the air. "Security will escort you out. Don't bother collecting your things, they'll be mailed to you." Reggie approached reluctantly, his eyes conveying a silent apology. "Wait," came a voice from across the lobby. Heads turned to see Catherine Winters, the bank's head of HR, rushing toward them with a look of alarm. "Marshall, what are you doing?" Marshall straightened his tie. "Handling a situation that should have been addressed long ago. This woman has been giving unauthorized exceptions to certain customers." The way he emphasized the word made it clear what he meant. "It stops today." Catherine's face paled. "Marshall, you need to stop this right now. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Marshall interrupted. "And frankly, I'm disappointed that the rest of management has allowed this kind of behavior to continue." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, a strange calm settling over her features. Slowly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather portfolio. "Mr. Donnelly," she said quietly, "I believe you started with First Capital 3 months ago, is that correct?" Marshall frowned. "That's irrelevant." Eleanor opened the portfolio and removed a business card, placing it on the counter between them. "I think you'll find it's quite relevant." Marshall glanced down, confusion giving way to shock as he read the embossed card. "Eleanor Jackson, Chief Executive Officer, First Capital Bank. That's going to become bank legend, you know." Eleanor laughed softly. "Not my finest moment, I'll admit. I should have identified myself earlier." "Maybe," Catherine conceded, "but sometimes people need a wake-up call. Marshall's been ruling his region like a little kingdom. The other branch managers have been complaining for weeks, but no one wanted to challenge the board's golden boy directly." "Well, consider him challenged," Eleanor said as they reached her car. "Will you ride with me to headquarters, or did you drive separately?" "I'll come with you," Catherine replied. "Can review the board presentation on the way." As they drove toward downtown Chicago, the gleaming skyscrapers growing larger in the windshield, Eleanor reflected on the morning's events. It wasn't the first time she had been underestimated or dismissed because of her race or gender, and despite the progress made over the decades, she doubted it would be the last. But with each such incident, there was an opportunity to educate, to challenge assumptions, to bring about change in small but meaningful ways. That had been her approach throughout her career, not to shatter glass ceilings with grand, dramatic gestures, but to steadily chip away at them, creating cracks that would eventually allow others to break through. "You're quiet," Catherine observed. "Having second thoughts about Marshall?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, he made a mistake, a serious one, but I believe he can learn from it. We all can." "That's why you're the boss," Catherine smiled. "Always seeing the potential in people, even when they're at their worst." "I had mentors who saw potential in me," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "Back in 1979, the president of the bank then, Arthur Winters, your father-in-law, as it happens." Catherine nodded. "James always said his father had an eye for talent. Arthur saw something in me that I didn't see in myself yet," Eleanor continued. "He pushed me to take night classes, to pursue that MBA, to apply for positions I thought were beyond my reach. When others questioned his judgment for promoting a young black woman in a traditionally white male industry, he never wavered in his support." "You've more than justified his faith in you," Catherine said warmly. "First Capital is stronger than ever under your leadership." Eleanor pulled into the underground parking garage of the First Capital headquarters building. "And when I retire next year, it will be stronger still under its new leadership." Catherine looked surprised. "You've made a decision, then?" "The board hasn't announced a succession plan yet." "Not officially," Eleanor conceded as she parked the car. "But I know who I'm recommending." She gave Catherine a meaningful look. "Diane," Catherine guessed. "She's certainly earned it." Eleanor shook her head. "Diane's an excellent branch manager, but she's not ready for the executive suite yet." She paused. "I'm recommending you, Catherine." Catherine's eyes widened. "Me, but I'm in HR, not finance. Ord will want someone with more direct banking experience." "What the bank needs isn't another finance person," Eleanor said firmly. It needs someone who understands people, employees, and customers alike, someone who shares the values that have made First Capital successful for a century, someone who sees banking as a service to the community, not just a business. Catherine looked genuinely moved. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Eleanor replied. We have time. And speaking of time, we should head upstairs. The board doesn't like to be kept waiting. As they rode the elevator to the executive floor, Eleanor felt a sense of satisfaction. The morning had not gone as planned, but perhaps it had gone as needed. Marshall Donnelly had learned a valuable lesson about perception and prejudice. The board would hear firsthand about the impact of their policies at the branch level. And Catherine had been given a glimpse of the future Eleanor envisioned for the bank, a future where the values of community, compassion, and opportunity continued to guide its path. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, where the sleek modern decor contrasted sharply with the traditional style of the Oak Grove branch. Here, glass and steel predominated, with the First Capital logo, a stylized oak tree, displayed prominently on the wall opposite the elevator. Back to the future, Eleanor murmured as they stepped out. What was that? Catherine asked. Eleanor smiled. Just thinking about how far we've come and how far we still have to go. As they walked toward the boardroom, employees greeted Eleanor with a mixture of respect and genuine affection. She knew most by name, asking about children and grandchildren, remembering birthdays and anniversaries. This was another lesson she had learned early in her career. Leadership wasn't just about making good decisions, it was about making people feel valued. Outside the boardroom, Eleanor paused. Before we go in, there's something else I want you to know, Catherine. What's that? The incident this morning with Marshall, it reminded me of something that happened to Arthur Winters back in 1968. Catherine looked intrigued. James never mentioned anything specific from that time. It wasn't something Arthur talked about much, Eleanor explained. But he told me the story when he promoted me to my first management position. It seems he was traveling in the South, visiting a small bank that First Capital was considering acquiring. When he arrived, wearing casual clothes because it was a Saturday, the local manager mistook him for a maintenance worker and ordered him to fix a leaking pipe in the bathroom. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. No, what did he do? He fixed the pipe, Eleanor said with a smile. He'd been a plumber's assistant in college, so he knew how. Then he put on his suit jacket, presented his credentials, and continued with the scheduled meeting as if nothing had happened. That sounds like Arthur, Catherine said, shaking her head in amazement. Later, when the local manager was mortified and apologizing profusely, Arthur told him something I've never forgotten. He said a person's worth isn't determined by their title or their appearance, but by how they treat others, especially those they believe can't help or harm them. That bank manager eventually became one of First Capital's most successful regional directors. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. You think Marshall could follow a similar path? I think everyone deserves the chance to learn and grow from their mistakes, Eleanor replied. Just as Arthur gave that manager a second chance, just as he gave me opportunities when others wouldn't, I believe in paying that forward. She straightened her jacket and checked her watch. Now let's go educate the board about the real impact of their policies. And Catherine? Yes. When Marshall arrives, make sure he sits next to old Mr. Harrington. Frank still thinks Reagan is president half the time, but he remembers every customer he ever served in his 40 years as a branch manager. He'll have some stories to tell. Catherine grinned. Consider it done. Together, they entered the boardroom, where the future of First Capital Bank and all the communities it served would continue to be shaped by the values Eleanor Jackson had upheld throughout her remarkable career. Dignity, respect, opportunity, and the fundamental belief that banking, at its best, was about serving people, not just profits. As the board meeting concluded 3 hours later, Eleanor watched with satisfaction as Marshall Donnelly engaged in animated conversation with Frank Harrington, the oldest member of the board. The young regional director was listening intently as Frank recounted stories from the 1970s housing crisis, when First Capital had worked with struggling homeowners to prevent foreclosures, a decision that had cost the bank in the short term, but had built unshakable community loyalty in the long run. Eleanor gathered her papers and prepared to leave, but Catherine caught her eye from across the room and nodded toward the doorway. Standing there, looking somewhat out of place in the executive environment, was Mr. Washington. Eleanor crossed the room to greet him. Mr. Washington, what a pleasant surprise. What brings you to headquarters? The elderly barber smiled broadly. Ms. Jackson, I just had to come thank you in person. That young man, Mr. Donnelly, he called me right after you left the branch. Not only did he approve my extension, but he's having someone review my business plan to see if we qualify for an expansion loan. An expansion loan? Eleanor raised her eyebrows. Are you finally going to add those 2 chairs you've been talking about for years? Mr. Washington chuckled. Yes, ma'am. My grandson just graduated from Barber College, and my nephew wants to join the business too. With 4 more chairs, we could serve more of the community and create jobs for young people in the neighborhood. That sounds wonderful, Eleanor said warmly. I'm glad Mr. Donnelly was helpful. He mentioned there had been some kind of misunderstanding at the branch this morning, Mr. Washington said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Said you set him straight about a few things. Eleanor smiled diplomatically. Let's just say we had a productive discussion about First Capital's values and commitment to the community. Mr. Washington nodded knowingly. Well, whatever you said must have worked. He was a different man on the phone, respectful, understanding, even asked about my wife's health. He paused, his expression growing more serious. You know, Ms. Jackson, when I first started banking with First Capital in 1975, they wouldn't even let me in the front door of the downtown branch. I had to use the colored entrance around back. Eleanor nodded solemnly. I remember those days, Mr. Washington. We've come a long way. That we have, he agreed. From being turned away at the door to having one of our own as CEO, my grandchildren can't even imagine it. And that's exactly as it should be, Eleanor replied. Each generation should find the path a little easier than the one before. As Mr. Washington prepared to leave, he shook Eleanor's hand firmly. You keep doing what you're doing, Ms. Jackson. People like you make a difference, not just for folks who look like us, but for everyone. Eleanor watched him go, deeply moved by his words. It was moments like these that made all the challenges worthwhile, the subtle discrimination she still occasionally faced, the exhausting need to constantly prove herself, the pressure of being the first or the only in so many situations throughout her career. Catherine approached, having overheard the conversation. That's why you do it, isn't it? All the long hours, the difficult meetings, dealing with board members who still call you young lady even though you're pushing 70. Eleanor smiled. That's a big part of it, yes, making sure the Mr. Washingtons of the world get a fair chance, making the path a little easier for those who come after us. Just then, Marshall Donnelly approached, looking simultaneously humbled and energized. Jackson, CEO Jackson, I wanted to thank you for including me in today's meeting. It was educational. I'm glad you found it valuable, Mr. Donnelly, Eleanor replied. I understand you've already spoken with Mr. Washington? Marshall nodded. Yes, and I've assigned one of our small business specialists to work with him on the expansion loan application. His business meets all our community investment criteria, and with his payment history, it should be straightforward to approve. Excellent, Eleanor said approvingly. And what about the review of the other loan applications I asked for? I've already started, Marshall assured her. My assistant is pulling the files now, but I wanted to ask, would you be willing to meet with me next week to discuss what I find? I have a feeling I may need guidance on how to rectify certain situations. Eleanor considered this. I think that's wise. Catherine, could you find time on my calendar for a meeting with Mr. Donnelly next Thursday? Of course, Catherine replied. Would 2:00 p.m. work for both of you? They agreed on the time, and Marshall excused himself to return to his branch, his demeanor markedly different from the arrogant regional director who had attempted to fire the CEO just hours earlier. Well, Catherine said once he was out of earshot, that was quite a transformation. People rise or fall to our expectations of them, Eleanor observed. Marshall expected very little of our customers in the Oak Grove community, and they sensed that. Now that he understands our values better, I think he'll begin to see the potential that has always been there. As they walked toward Eleanor's office, Catherine brought up the succession plan again. Were you serious about recommending me to the board as your replacement? Absolutely, Eleanor confirmed. You understand the heart of this institution better than anyone. The board will need convincing. They're still fixated on MBA credentials and financial expertise, but they respect my judgment. I'd have some big shoes to fill, Catherine said thoughtfully. Eleanor chuckled. Don't worry about filling my shoes. Bring your own. Every leader brings different strengths to the role. Arthur Winters was a visionary who expanded the bank during a time when others were contracting. I focused on modernizing our operations while maintaining our community connections. You'll find your own path. They reached Eleanor's office, a spacious corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Unlike the sterile, impersonal executive offices in many corporations, Eleanor's space reflected her personality and history. Family photographs shared shelf space with industry awards. A vintage First Capital Bank teller window nameplate, Eleanor Jackson, teller, was displayed prominently beside her modern CEO nameplate. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said as she settled behind her desk, "about making these branch visits more formal and more frequent." Catherine took a seat across from her. "In what way?" "I want all our executives to spend time in the branches regularly, not just for inspections or evaluations, but to work alongside the staff, interact with customers, experience banking from their perspective." "Like undercover boss, but not undercover," Catherine suggested. Eleanor smiled. "Something like that. Too often, decisions are made in boardrooms by people who haven't stood on the other side of a teller window in decades, if ever. I think it would be valuable for everyone. The executives would gain insights they couldn't get any other way, and the branch staff would feel more connected to leadership." "I like it," Catherine said enthusiastically. "It reinforces our values and keeps leadership grounded in the day-to-day reality of our business." "Exactly," Eleanor agreed. "Draft a proposal, would you? We can present it at the next executive committee meeting." As Catherine made notes, Eleanor gazed out at the city she had called home her entire life. From her window, she could see the South Side neighborhood where she had grown up, the university where she had earned her degrees while working full-time, and the evolving skyline that represented both Chicago's rich history and its ongoing transformation. In many ways, her own journey mirrored that of the city, overcoming obstacles, breaking barriers, building on the past while embracing the future. She had risen from teller to CEO not despite the challenges she had faced as a black woman in banking, but in part because of them. Those challenges had forced her to be more prepared, more resilient, more strategic than her peers. They had taught her the importance of lifting others as she climbed. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine asked, noticing Eleanor's reflective mood. "The future," Eleanor replied, "and the past. They're more connected than we sometimes realize." She turned back to her desk and picked up a framed photograph, herself as a young teller in 1979, standing proudly in front of the Oak Grove branch in her First Capital uniform. "You know, when I started at the bank, I never imagined becoming CEO," she confided. "I just wanted a steady job with decent pay and the chance to help people in my community. But Arthur Winters saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself yet." "Just as you see something in me," Catherine observed. Eleanor nodded. "And just as you'll see potential in others, that's how progress happens, one person believing in another, creating opportunities, passing the torch." She set the photograph down and picked up her schedule for the remainder of the day. "Speaking of the future, I have a mentoring session with the summer interns in 15 minutes. Want to join me? They're a bright group, diverse, tech-savvy, full of ideas for how banking should evolve." "I'd love to," Catherine replied, gathering her things. As they left the office together, Eleanor felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The day had not gone as planned, far from it, but sometimes the most valuable lessons came from unexpected challenges. Marshall Donnelly had learned about the true values of First Capital Bank. Mr. Washington would be able to expand his business and create opportunities for the next generation. And Catherine had glimpsed the future Eleanor envisioned for the institution she had served for more than 4 decades. Change was inevitable in banking, as in life. Technology would continue to transform how financial services were delivered. Regulations would evolve. Customer expectations would shift. But through it all, the fundamental purpose of First Capital Bank would remain constant: to serve its communities with dignity, respect, and a commitment to creating opportunity for all. Eleanor Jackson had dedicated her career to upholding those values, even when it meant standing her ground against those who underestimated her. As she prepared to pass the torch to the next generation of leadership, she did so with confidence that the legacy she had helped build would endure, a legacy of inclusion, compassion, and the unwavering belief that banking, at its best, was about investing in people and their potential. And if occasionally that meant allowing someone like Marshall Donnelly to learn a valuable lesson about appearances and assumptions, well, that was all part of the job. 2 months later, Eleanor stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, addressing the annual meeting of the National Bankers Association, a gathering of minority-owned and operated financial institutions from across the country. The audience included bank executives, community leaders, regulators, and aspiring banking professionals. "When I entered this industry in 1979, Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, the face of banking was very different than it is today. I often found myself the only woman in meetings and almost always the only person of color. Times have changed, though not as much as some might think. She paused, scanning the diverse faces looking back at her. Banking has always been about trust, trust that your money is safe, trust that you'll be treated fairly, trust that someone will be there to help when you need it. But for too many communities, that trust was broken long ago through redlining, discrimination, and unequal access to financial services. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. At First Capital Bank, we've worked to rebuild that trust, one customer and one community at a time. We've learned that true service means meeting people where they are, understanding their needs, their dreams, and the barriers they face. Eleanor's gaze settled on a table near the front where several people from First Capital were seated, including Catherine Winters, and somewhat surprisingly, Marshall Donnelly. Recently, one of our regional directors had what you might call an educational experience, Eleanor continued, a slight smile playing at her lips. He encountered an older black woman in one of our branches and made certain assumptions about her assumptions that proved to be quite mistaken. Knowing glances were exchanged throughout the room. The story of Eleanor's confrontation with Marshall had indeed become something of a legend in banking circles over the past 2 months. That regional director learned an important lesson that day, one that all of us in this room already know well. You cannot judge someone's worth, intelligence, or abilities based on their appearance, their age, or the color of their skin. Eleanor's expression grew more serious. But the larger lesson wasn't about one person's bias or assumptions. It was about the systems and cultures we create within our institutions. It was about asking ourselves, who feels welcome in our spaces? Who has access to our services? Whose voices are heard in our decision-making processes? She leaned forward slightly, her voice becoming more passionate. Banking is not neutral. Every loan approved or denied, every branch opened or closed, every policy implemented or ignored, these decisions shape communities for generations. They determine who can buy homes, start businesses, send children to college, build wealth to pass on to the next generation. Many in the audience nodded in agreement. As leaders in minority banking, we have a unique perspective on these issues. We understand that financial inclusion isn't just a nice ideal, it's an economic imperative. When all communities have access to fair, responsible financial services, everyone benefits. Businesses grow, neighborhoods thrive, families build stability and security. Eleanor took a sip of water before continuing. I'm proud to say that First Capital Bank has made significant strides in this area. In the past year alone, we've increased small business lending in underserved communities by 28%. We've launched a first-time homebuyer program specifically designed to address the racial homeownership gap. And we've expanded our financial education initiatives to reach more schools, churches, and community organizations. She smiled as she looked toward her colleagues. I'm even prouder to say that every member of our executive team now spends at least 1 day each quarter working in our branches, serving customers, processing transactions, and experiencing banking from the other side of the desk. It's been illuminating. This drew knowing laughter from the audience. As I prepare to retire next year after more than 4 decades with First Capital, I've been reflecting on the changes I've witnessed in our industry. Some have been revolutionary: the rise of digital banking, the increasing diversity of our workforce, the growing recognition that financial health is integral to overall well-being. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. But some things haven't changed nearly enough. Too many Americans still lack access to basic banking services. The racial wealth gap remains stubbornly wide. And yes, there are still those who make assumptions about who belongs in the executive suite based on outdated stereotypes and biases. She straightened her shoulders, her voice regaining its strength. That's why the work of everyone in this room is so vital. You are not just bankers, you are agents of economic justice. You are community builders. You are creating pathways to opportunity and prosperity for those who have been systematically excluded for too long. Eleanor looked directly at the younger bankers in the audience. To those of you just beginning your careers, know that the path won't always be easy. There will be days when you question whether you belong, days when others question whether you belong. On those days, remember that you stand on the shoulders of pioneers who faced far greater obstacles, people who weren't allowed to have bank accounts, let alone manage them. She smiled warmly. Remember also that your perspective is your power. Your experiences, especially the difficult ones, give you insights that others may lack. Use those insights to create more inclusive, responsive financial institutions. As Eleanor concluded her remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation. She acknowledged their response with a gracious nod before leaving the stage. At the reception following her speech, Eleanor found herself approached by a young woman perhaps in her early 30s with a tentative smile. "Ms. Jackson, I'm Zara Washington. My grandfather asked me to deliver a message to you." Eleanor's eyes widened in recognition. "You're Jefferson Washington's granddaughter, the one who just graduated from Barber College." Zara looked surprised. "Yes, that's right. How did you know?" "Your grandfather and I go way back," Eleanor explained with a smile. "How is he doing, and how is the expansion coming along?" "That's actually why he wanted me to find you," Zara replied enthusiastically. "The renovation is complete. We're having a grand reopening next Saturday, and he was hoping you might be able to attend. He said, and I'm quoting here, 'Tell Ms. Jackson she needs to come see what her bank's money helped build.'" Eleanor laughed. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Please tell him I'll be there." As Zara walked away, Catherine approached with Marshall Donnelly in tow. "Powerful speech," Catherine said, handing Eleanor a glass of sparkling water. "I think you made quite an impression on our regional director here." Marshall nodded, looking somewhat abashed. "It was illuminating, as you said, especially the part about systems and cultures." Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully. "How are things at the Oak Grove branch these days, Mr. Donnelly?" "Much improved," he replied with genuine enthusiasm. "Loan applications are up 42%, customer satisfaction scores have rebounded, and we've actually seen an influx of new accounts from local businesses." "Including Mr. Washington's barbershop, I hear," Eleanor observed. Marshall smiled. "Yes, his expansion loan was one of the first I personally approved after our encounter. I've been working closely with him on the business plan. He's quite the entrepreneur, has ideas for a barber training program for at-risk youth, possibly even a small chain of shops eventually." "You sound impressed," Eleanor noted. "I am," Marshall admitted. "When I first arrived at First Capital, I was so focused on standardizing processes and managing risk that I missed the bigger picture. Now I'm getting to know our customers as people, understanding their aspirations, their challenges. It's changed my whole approach to banking." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what banking should be, knowing your customers, understanding their needs, helping them achieve their goals." She glanced at Catherine. "Wouldn't you agree, future CEO?" Catherine blushed slightly. "The board hasn't made their decision yet." "But they will," Eleanor said confidently. "And when they do, I hope you'll consider keeping Mr. Donnelly on as regional director. He's learning." Marshall looked surprised by this endorsement. "Thank you, Ms. Jackson. That means a great deal coming from you." As the reception continued around them, Eleanor felt a deep sense of contentment. Her career had been a series of challenges and triumphs, setbacks and breakthroughs. There had been times when she questioned whether she belonged in the banking world, times when others definitely questioned it. But through it all, she had remained true to her vision of what banking could and should be, a force for positive change in communities, a pathway to economic opportunity for all. In Marshall Donnelly, she saw a reminder of how far the industry had come and how far it still had to go. His initial assumptions and attitudes had reflected the old guard of banking, focused on numbers rather than people, on processes rather than possibilities. But his willingness to learn and change gave her hope for the future. As Eleanor prepared to pass the torch to Catherine and the next generation of leadership at First Capital, she did so with confidence that the values she had championed throughout her career would endure. The bank would continue to evolve, adapt to new technologies and changing customer expectations, but its fundamental purpose would remain constant: to serve its communities with dignity, respect, and a commitment to creating opportunity for all. And if occasionally that meant allowing someone to learn a valuable lesson about appearances and assumptions, well, that was all part of the legacy she would leave behind. The following Saturday, Eleanor arrived at Washington's barbershop for the grand reopening. The small storefront had been transformed, expanded into the vacant space next door, with fresh paint, new fixtures, and 6 barber chairs instead of the original 2. A banner stretched across the front window proclaimed, "Serving the community since 1968, now bigger and better." Jefferson Washington greeted Eleanor at the door, his face beaming with pride. "Ms. Jackson, you made it." "I wouldn't have missed this for anything," Eleanor replied warmly, embracing the elderly barber. "Jefferson, this looks amazing." "Come, let me show you around," he insisted, taking her arm. "You won't believe what we've done with the place." As Jefferson led her through the renovated shop, introducing her to family members who would be working there, Eleanor noticed a familiar face among the guests, Marshall Donnelly, chatting comfortably with Zara Washington about the barber training program she hoped to establish. "I invited your young man from the bank," Jefferson explained, following her gaze. "He's been a great help with the business plan and financing." even suggested applying for a small business grant from the city to help with the training program. "He's learning," Eleanor observed with satisfaction. "That he is," Jefferson agreed. "And so am I. Never thought I'd be expanding at my age, but here we are, 3 generations of Washingtons working under one roof, creating opportunities for the community. That's something special." "Yes," Eleanor said softly, "that's something very special indeed." As she watched the celebration unfold around her family's gathering, community members connecting, a multi-generational business thriving, Eleanor Jackson felt the full circle of her journey. From a young teller who had faced discrimination and doubt to the CEO who had shaped an institution dedicated to inclusion and opportunity, she had helped create spaces where everyone could belong, succeed, and build a future. That was her legacy, not just at First Capital Bank, but in every life touched by the institution she had led with wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to seeing the potential in others, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. The transformative power of dignity, respect, and opportunity. The importance of looking beyond appearances to recognize the true worth of every individual. The necessity of standing firm in the face of prejudice and misconception. These were the lessons Eleanor Jackson had learned and taught throughout her remarkable career, lessons that would continue to resonate long after she stepped down as CEO, lessons embodied in the thriving barbershop around her, and in the changing culture of the bank she had served for more than 40 years. As Jefferson Washington raised a toast to new beginnings and old friends, Eleanor smiled. This was what banking at its best could accomplish, not just managing money, but helping build communities, create opportunities, and transform lives. And in the end, wasn't that what truly mattered? Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.